My final exam was a loneliness called solo. My only companions were the wind, the rock, and the fire beside me. 3 days and 3 nights of challenge, and then a moment of triumph. I'll never forget that last day and the special feelings it brought. My thoughts ran deep and wide as I spent those last few hours looking back over the 3.5 weeks I'd spent in this wilderness. The 3.5 weeks it took to learn about my fellow man and about myself. It began one fall morning on an old bus grinding its way down a twisted mountain road. The passengers were young men from all walks of life, from all parts of the country. The winding dirt road led us deep into the mountains of western North Carolina and the Pisgah National Forest. A long way from home and an even longer way from the easy life we'd enjoyed days before. As I look back on that trip now, it occurs to me that none of us really knew what awaited us at the end of our journey, and many of us just weren't prepared for the shock that would greet our arrival in this strange new place. The ride ended suddenly, abruptly, in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't a building or a tent in sight. In fact, the only sign of civilization was the 2 men who were waiting to check us off the bus. My welcome to the North Carolina Outward Bound School came in a gut-straining hike up the side of a mountain with 50 pounds of duffel bag on my shoulder. The school was a real jolt to me at first, and I'll have to admit in those first few minutes I wondered even if I could take it. But there were many things I didn't understand that first day. There'd be a lot of changes in us before we were through with this course. There would be many new things to learn and accept. The first thing we learned was that this was no summer camp, and that we weren't here just for fun and recreation. Our first official exercise was an orientation class. We ran, not walked, about a mile to the top of a big rock where our instructor told us of the Outward Bound School, what some of our objectives were, and what we could expect for the next 26 days.
There are 12 of you. The rock below you, the valley before you, and at your back, the gorge.
He was a rugged, intense man who knew Outward Bound and knew it well. I could tell he took his job seriously. The words were plain enough. There'd be no fooling around. It would be 26 days of mental and physical stress unlike anything we had ever experienced before. We would be pushed to the very limit of our endurance, then beyond, and eventually we would be pushed even beyond that. We would discover during the course of our training that we could stand far more pressure and strain than we thought. And at least once during those days of training, everyone in the crew would sense his outer limit. We would also learn about each other. Each of us would come to know and depend upon others unlike himself. And there would be times when we would literally hold each other's lives in our hands.
You can come to know all there is to know about map reading and all there is to know about a compass. You can come to know first aid perfectly and all of the things that we teach you, and if this is what you go home with, and this alone, we will have failed. This is not a physical fitness expedition. This is not recreation. This is a question of interpreting the experience you have before you through the symbolic action of trees, rocks, and water. Consider the nature of growth. Consider the nature of flux. And consider the nature of the permanence and the steadiness that you find in this granite.
At first, I wasn't too happy with the selection of our crew. Some of them I didn't like. Others seemed to have no common ground for friendship. It was a sort of melting pot of people. Some of the guys were from wealthy homes and some were not. A couple of them were several years older than I. A few were younger. Each of us was different from the others in some way. The training was exhausting at times, and there seemed to be a constant emphasis on teamwork. I began to experience situations where my own success in a particular exercise would depend on the performance of my crew members, and there were times when the rest of the crew had to depend on me. Gradually, during those first few days, the personality differences among the members of our crew, differences which first had seemed so important and sometimes so annoying, began to fade away. We were beginning to think and work together as a team. We were also beginning to accept each other. We soon learned that each man in the group had to put out maximum effort for his team, and no one was expected to do less than his best.
Hold my hand. Happy. You go all the way across. Hey, let's try to get 12 people across and get the bomb and then we'll chill.
Every morning at 5 minutes to 6, we began the day by running a mile, then plunging into a shower of ice-cold mountain water. I didn't exactly look forward to this, but I can guarantee there was no one half asleep when it was time for breakfast, and no one was without an appetite.
That away. Now give it rope. Hold the rope. No, it ain't. Work out.
Each day served up its own kind of challenge, its own test of courage, and each day seemed to be tougher than the day before. It became routine to face adversity, commonplace to overcome it. Sometimes the obstacles seemed beyond conquering, and sometimes one of us might have to dig deep to find the kind of courage that could drown out the screams of protest coming from a heart and mind afraid. These were the times when we looked over our shoulder and saw our old limit behind us. My first real test came the day our group was taking a confidence and conditioning exercise known as the ropes course. I was doing well, I thought, and had very little trouble until I got to that part of the course called the platforms. My heart was in my throat when I looked down and saw a little disc of wood far beneath me. A few minutes before, as I'd watched others jump the platforms, it had seemed easy. But I was frozen there. I was humiliated, perhaps, but I just couldn't move. I probably would have stood there all day if the instructor hadn't come over. He began talking, and I began listening.
Just move out to the edge and flex your knees. Now, I want you to look at the center of the platform. Just study the center of the platform, bend your knees slightly, and walk out. You don't have to jump. All you have to do is walk out and concentrate on landing in the platform right in the center. Okay?
At first his talking bugged me. I was ashamed that I couldn't make the jump, and I didn't want to call attention to my failure. I wanted to be left alone, and I wanted to climb down from that perch and forget it had ever happened. For a moment, all the ideals, the objectives of Outward Bound deserted me, and for a moment I forgot that failure is not the way of life around here. His words finally began to get to me. There was a kind of urgency in his voice, and he made it seem desperately important that I overcome this challenge. Soon it became that important to me, too. The most important thing in my life at that moment was jumping. I knew I had to do it, for the crew and for the instructor, but most of all, for myself.
Remember form. Now, turn away from me and look at the center of the platform. Very easy. Okay, now just forget all about me. Concentrate on the center of the platform, and I want you to jump. very, very easy. Right, now do it. Just do it. You're wasting my life, Bill. Okay, now, move on to the next one. Come on now, same thing. Bingo.
It was a proud moment for me. I was so elated, I jumped again, and it was easy the second time. There would be other times like this, times when physical and mental strength, when spirit and ability would surface from deep inside, offering courage to someone facing fear. And there would be other proud moments. In a way, it was lucky for me that training was so rough and so demanding of full concentration, because there was another thought trying to get my attention. It was solo, the last and most demanding test I would face. Fortunately, I had little time to get involved with the hang-ups of the future. It was all any of us could do to face and overcome the problems of the present. And the Burma Bridge is no place for daydreaming. This was a serious exercise, difficult enough without the added burden of thoughts premature and out of place. The bridge seemed fragile and shaky, as if one false step would make the whole thing collapse. Again, confidence assumed an important role, with the added need for sure feet, of course. There's a safety rope to protect you from falling, but I soon forgot it was there and made the crossing as if my life depended on it. The zip wire can only be described as a spectacular, exhilarating experience. I felt 10 feet tall when it was over.
Probably the most important part of the equipment that we use here is this rope. This rope is a nylon rope. It has a tensile strength of approximately 5,000 pounds. Now this rope has part of its strength in its elasticity. It stretches approximately a third of its length. It is, when it's new, a very safe rope, but if it's used for a while, it stretches and it may lose some of its safety.
Some of the most important outdoor skills taught at the North Carolina School are mountain climbing, rappelling, and mountain rescue techniques. All the weeks of work and sweat, building confidence in ourselves, developing our minds and bodies to perform competently in unusual and possibly dangerous situations, all this finally led to the fabulous cliffs of Table Rock Mountain. We would be using these skills to match wits with an unrelenting nature and some of the most rugged territory in the country. And we were as ready as 2.5 weeks of intensive instruction by top-flight experts could make us. One of the most useful of our rock climbing skills was mountain rescue procedure. We had been trained in emergency medical aid and the technique of search and rescue. We had learned that the concern for life is the primary emphasis of outward bound training. We knew how to take an injured person off the side of a mountain by using ropes and a special litter. And we spent quite a while getting good at it. The awe-inspiring beauty of Table Rock conceals the rugged challenge which awaited us on its tall, sheer cliffs. We were well-trained, well-equipped, and confident, and we were assisted by experienced climbers who had traveled the earth conquering some of the great mountains. There was no goofing off, no horseplay of any kind. The job was taken seriously. It had to be. Our lives would depend on it. I understand now why we had worked so hard on teamwork and learning to depend on others. The boy above holding your safety rope might have been a stranger having nothing in common with you a few days ago. You might even have disliked him a few hours ago, but now he was your best friend. It was a beautiful sight and a great feeling to look out over Linville Gorge from the top of a mountain and to know that you've mastered a small piece of this vast wilderness. This was again a time when success depended on confidence. Confidence in team, confidence in self, and faith in the slender rope attached to a life. Toward the end of our course, our crew left the base camp and embarked on our final expedition. 4 days of practicing all the skills we had learned, 4 days of hiking and camping our way through the wilderness, and 4 days of each other. The scenery and the weather were often beautiful, sometimes hostile. We learned a great deal about each other on this trip. In some of the guys, I saw fear and weakness brought out in the face of an environment which seemed uncivilized to them. In others, qualities of leadership, for years buried under a lack of need, sprang forth and became useful. Most impressive of all, though, was the sight of our crew, on its own, working together, sharing the responsibility of survival, and coexisting as men should. I think our expedition was a great success, and when we returned to the school, we knew each other very well. The 6-mile marathon was a test of endurance, of guts. A race against the clock and a contest of individuals, each one out to prove himself. This was, as all things are at Outward Bound, demanding, grueling, the kind of test that takes all you have to offer and then shouts for more. And when the call comes, you give more. In competition, our crew pitted its stamina and spirit against that of the other groups. We were functioning smoothly as individuals and as a team now, and every single one of us had his own burning desire to win. After 20 days of training that required daily success and accomplishment, no one was accustomed to losing. So spirit was high and the effort was fierce, and every man gave it all he had. My apprehension about Solo finally became too much. I had to talk to someone I respected. Lance was sympathetic to my problem and sensitive to my feelings. He had seen it before. We talked for a long time and about many things. His words were uncompromising, but reassuring, and I felt better about the lonely wait before me. He told me to listen carefully to his next morning's reading. The next day I waited anxiously for his words.
You go on solo today to spend 4 days out in these
I
forests.
suppose I was really hoping for some magic formula, maybe some special advice that would supply the strength and courage that seemed lacking in me. His talk was brief, to the point, and I began to get the message. I don't think I was really afraid of just the loneliness and the hunger. It went beyond that. Deep down, I think I was afraid of myself, of the 3 days and 3 nights I would have to sit alone with someone maybe I really didn't know. It was kind of like being haunted by your own ghost. But I knew it would still be my greatest test.
There is no end of the road. There is only the soul of man, which names everything in keeping with its own bravery or cowardice. We have a moment of silence.
That night I turned in early, and as I lay there listening to the singing, I thought about my tomorrow and all it would bring. 6 matches, a plastic sheet, and the clothes on my back. Not much company, but these would be the only material things I could take with me. They said solo would let you see yourself as never before. I wondered what it would be like to look in that mirror when I didn't want to look. The fear, it was still there, but at least now it was matched with determination.
The answer is blowing in the wind.
Solo came to me in long, lonely days, and the time passed slowly. On that last day, the fire felt warmer, and for the first time since the ordeal began, I enjoyed its comfort. There had been the hours and days of hunger, the chill of cold night air made colder by the isolation. There had been plenty of time to think of food and of home, and it had become necessary to take that look at myself. The time for reassessment, the opportunity to put myself in perspective. It was not easy. It wasn't meant to be. Nothing at Outward Bound is meant to be easy, but it was necessary. And I know now there could have been no better way to climax those 26 days. I had learned much here, and I had changed. I felt older, stronger, more mature, and perhaps wiser. I had gained in confidence and self-respect. I was anxious to get on with my life. I spent many of those long hours thinking about the school and about my adventure in that beautiful mountain wilderness. Those 26 days were the roughest I had ever experienced, but in looking back on them now, they were also the greatest and the most rewarding days of my life. As I waited those last few hours on that rock, I felt a great pride. I felt the satisfaction of self-discovery, for I had won a great battle, a battle against myself. There was another feeling I had that day, a very special feeling, and a very personal one, the feeling of crossing the threshold of manhood. And that's what Outward Bound is all about.